She tried to kick a black man off the plane until the captain revealed who he really was. The morning fog clung to the tarmac at Los Angeles International Airport like a premonition of the storm about to unfold at 38,000 feet. Darius Mitchell stood at the priority boarding gate for Pacific Airways Flight 892, his weathered UCLA hoodie and faded jeans, a deliberate choice that would soon expose more about American air travel than any corporate audit ever could. In exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes, one woman's demand to have him removed from first class would transform not just a single flight, but an entire airline industry. She just didn't know yet that the suspicious black man she wanted thrown off the plane had bought the entire airline 6 days ago. The fluorescent lights of LAX Terminal 4 cast harsh shadows across the boarding area as Darius Mitchell adjusted the strap of his worn leather messenger bag. At 52 years old, he had learned to navigate airports with the careful precision of someone who understood that his 6'2" frame and dark skin made him visible in ways that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with assumption. The UCLA hoodie he wore had been a gift from his daughter Zara when she graduated from medical school 3 years ago, its faded blue fabric soft from countless washes, the Golden Bear logo barely visible anymore. His jeans bore the comfortable wear of someone who valued function over fashion, and his canvas sneakers had walked through more boardrooms than most executives' Italian leather shoes. He had specifically chosen this outfit for today's flight for reasons that would become devastatingly clear to everyone in first class before they reached cruising altitude. The boarding pass on his phone showed Seat 2A, Pacific Airways Flight 892, the red-eye from Los Angeles to New York. Priority boarding Group 1, the kind of access that came with first-class tickets that cost more than many people's monthly rent. But Darius wasn't interested in the flatbed seats or the pre-flight champagne. He was interested in something far more valuable: truth. 6 days ago in a conference room overlooking Century City, Darius had signed the papers that made him the majority owner of Pacific Airways. The acquisition had been deliberately quiet executed through a series of shell companies and investment funds to prevent market speculation and competitive interference. The airline industry press would find out next week when the official announcement was scheduled. The 12,000 employees of Pacific Airways would receive the news in a carefully orchestrated series of meetings. The board of directors already knew, of course, having approved the sale after Darius's offer proved too generous to refuse. But before any of that, before the press releases and the town halls and the strategic planning sessions, Darius wanted to experience his airline as a passenger. Not as a VIP with executive lounges and special treatment, but as a regular traveler, albeit one who could afford first class. He wanted to see how his employees treated customers when they didn't know the boss was watching. He wanted to feel the culture of the company he now owned, understand its strengths and weaknesses from the inside. What he was about to discover would validate every concern that had driven him to buy the airline in the first place. Behind him in the priority boarding line, Victoria Sterling balanced her latest model iPhone in one manicured hand while scrolling through emails with the practiced efficiency of someone who considered every moment away from work a personal failing. At 48, she embodied corporate success in every carefully curated detail: the cream-colored Armani blazer that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobe, the subtle but expensive highlights in her perfectly styled blonde hair, the kind of jewelry that whispered rather than shouted its value. As Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Nexus Pharmaceuticals, she was accustomed to deference from service staff competitors, and especially from people who didn't look like they belonged in her rarefied world. Her pale blue eyes swept over Darius with the kind of assessment she usually reserved for quarterly reports and acquisition targets. The calculation was instant and dismissive: the hoodie old, the jeans cheap, the shoes ridiculous, the bag worn, the skin black. The conclusion formed before she could even pretend to examine her bias: he did not belong here. The fact that he stood in the same priority line, holding the same first-class access she possessed, created a cognitive dissonance that immediately transformed into irritation. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular tone perfected in boardrooms and country clubs, the one that managed to sound polite while dripping with condescension. "I think there might be some confusion. This is the priority boarding line." Darius turned slowly, a lifetime of these interactions, having taught him that sudden movements were often misinterpreted by people like Victoria. He met her gaze with calm brown eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. "Good morning," No confusion, but thank you for your concern. The brevity of his response seemed to agitate her. Victoria's fingers tightened around her phone, her wedding ring catching the harsh airport lighting. It's just that general boarding hasn't been called yet. The signs can be confusing, especially if English isn't your first language. There it was, the assumption layered upon assumption. Darius felt a familiar burn of anger in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in these situations only fed the narrative people like Victoria were already writing in their heads. I appreciate your concern, he repeated, his voice carrying a hint of the Harvard education she would never guess he possessed. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Behind Victoria, an elderly couple had joined the line. Harold and Margaret Johnson, married for 46 years, returning from their grandson's wedding in Pasadena. Harold, a retired federal judge, recognized the scene unfolding with the weary familiarity of someone who had witnessed too many such encounters. He gently touched his wife's arm, a silent communication that said, "Pay attention, be ready." Margaret, who had participated in the Freedom Rides in 1961 and still carried the scars, both physical and emotional, from that time, straightened her spine. She knew that look in Victoria's eyes, had seen it in the faces of people who threw rocks at buses and screamed at children trying to enter schools. The clothes were nicer, now the language more coded, but the hatred was the same. The gate agent, a young woman named Jessica Chen, called for priority boarding with the cheerful efficiency of someone at the beginning of a long shift. Good morning, folks. We're ready to begin priority boarding for Pacific Airways Flight 892 with service to New York's JFK Airport. Group 1, please have your boarding passes ready. Darius stepped forward, presenting his mobile boarding pass. Jessica scanned it with a warm smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Victoria practically breathing down Darius's neck. Welcome aboard, Mr. Mitchell, Jessica said, handing him back his phone. Seat 2A, you'll be on your left as you board. Enjoy your flight to New York. Victoria pushed forward before Darius could take more than 2 steps. Excuse me, miss, she said to Jessica, her voice loud enough to draw attention from other passengers. I think you should scan his pass again. These electronic systems can be so unreliable, and we certainly want to ensure everyone's safety. Jessica's professionalism wavered for just a moment, confusion flickering across her features. Ma'am, I've already verified Mr. Mitchell's boarding pass. He's cleared for boarding. I'm sure you did your best. Victoria continued, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. But given the current climate, don't you think it's better to be absolutely certain? I'd hate for there to be any security issues once we're in the air. You understand, being Asian yourself, how important proper verification is. The casual racism of the comment hung in the air like smog. Jessica's face flushed, but before she could respond, Harold Johnson stepped forward. Young lady, he said to Jessica, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, you've done your job perfectly. This passenger, he indicated Darius, has been properly verified. I witnessed the entire exchange. He turned to Victoria, his eyes sharp despite his 73 years. Ma'am, if you have security concerns, perhaps you should speak with TSA. Otherwise, I suggest you allow the boarding process to continue. Victoria's face colored slightly, but she wasn't backing down. I'm simply being cautious. In today's world, Margaret Johnson interrupted, her voice steady and strong, we should be more concerned about people who harass other passengers than about a man quietly boarding a plane. Darius had pulled out his phone and was holding it casually at his side, the video recording app running. He'd learned to document these encounters after too many instances where his word alone wasn't believed. The phone captured Victoria's increasingly agitated expression, the way her eyes kept darting to his hands, as if expecting him to pull out something dangerous. Sir, Jessica said apologetically to Darius, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Would you mind if I scan your boarding pass once more, just to settle any concerns? Darius presented his phone again, the QR code bright on the screen. Jessica scanned at the system, beeping its approval. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Everything is perfectly in order. Please proceed to the aircraft. As Darius moved toward the jet bridge, he could hear Victoria's heels clicking rapidly behind him, her voice carrying in the narrow corridor. This is ridiculous. I've been flying with Pacific Airways for 20 years. 20 years, and I've never seen such lax security. Anyone could claim to have a first-class ticket these days. The jet bridge seemed longer than usual, each step accompanied by Victoria's running commentary about declining standard security threats and the need for proper verification. Other passengers began boarding behind them, creating an audience for her performance. Inside the aircraft, the familiar scent of recycled air and industrial carpet greeted Darius. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737-900 featured 12 seats in a three-row configuration, each a small pod of privilege separated from the economy cabin by a curtain that might as well have been a wall. Darius found 2A, a window seat on the left side of the aircraft, and settled in, pulling out his laptop to review the quarterly reports Elena had sent him that morning. Elena Rodriguez, his chief of staff, and the only person besides the board who knew about his plans for today's flight, had wanted to accompany him. "You know, something's going to happen," she had said, her brown eyes serious. "It always does." "That's exactly why I need to do this alone," Darius had replied. "I need to see it unfiltered, experience it firsthand. How else can I fix what's broken if I don't know exactly how it breaks?" Victoria took her seat in 2C, the aisle seat directly across from Darius. The middle seat between them remained empty, a small mercy that wouldn't last. She made a production of sanitizing her space, pulling out wipes and spraying everything within reach, while shooting pointed looks at Darius, as if his very presence contaminated the air she breathed. The chief flight attendant for today's flight was Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran with Pacific Airways, who had started as a gate agent and worked her way up through sheer determination and an unshakable commitment to passenger service. Maria had developed what she called her trouble radar over the years, an ability to sense when a situation was about to escalate. Right now, that radar was pinging like a submarine under attack. She approached with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate narrow aisles in turbulence and narrow minds in society. "Good morning, folks. Welcome aboard. Can I start you with something to drink before we push back? We have champagne, orange juice, or a mimosa if you're feeling festive." "Champagne," Victoria said immediately, then added, "Maria, dear, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Maria's smile never wavered, though Darius noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "Of course, ma'am. How can I help you?" Victoria lowered her voice to a stage whisper that was anything but discreet. "I'm not entirely comfortable with the seating arrangement. The gentleman in 2A was behaving suspiciously at the gate, and there seemed to be some confusion about his documentation. Perhaps there's been some sort of mix-up with the seat assignments." Maria glanced at Darius, who appeared absorbed in his laptop screen, though she suspected he heard every word. "All passengers have been properly verified by our gate staff, ma'am. If you have specific security concerns..." "I've been flying first class with Pacific Airways for 2 decades. Victoria interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "I know what typical first-class passengers look like, and this is highly irregular." Before Maria could respond, 2 more passengers entered first class. Christopher Brennan, 35, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from a decade on Wall Street and a trust fund that ensured he'd never face real consequences for his actions. His Brooks Brothers suit was impeccable, his Princeton class ring prominent, his entire bearing suggesting someone who believed the world owed him deference. Behind him came Samantha Williams, 32, a civil rights attorney returning from a conference on workplace discrimination in Los Angeles. The irony of walking into this situation wasn't lost on her as she observed the tension in the cabin with professional interest. Her keen legal mind immediately began cataloging details, body language, specific words used potential witnesses. Christopher took seat 1B directly in front of Victoria and immediately picked up on the dynamic. His eyes swept over Darius with the same dismissive assessment Victoria had performed. "Everything okay here?" he asked Victoria, his tone suggesting a solidarity born from shared assumptions. "There seems to be some confusion about the passenger manifest," Victoria replied, grateful for what she perceived as an ally. "This gentleman," she gestured toward Darius without looking at him, "may be in the wrong cabin." Christopher turned in his seat to get a better look at Darius. "Yeah, I can see why you'd be concerned. Hey, buddy," he addressed Darius with the kind of false familiarity that preceded condescension. "You sure you're in the right seat? Sometimes those boarding passes can be confusing." Darius looked up from his laptop for the first time since sitting down, his expression calm, but his eyes holding a sharpness that Christopher wasn't expecting. "I'm quite certain, thank you, but I appreciate everyone's sudden concern for my literacy and navigation skills. It's touching, really." The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. Christopher's face flushed slightly. "No need to get defensive, man. We're just trying to help." "Help with what exactly?" Samantha interjected from seat 3D. "The gentleman is sitting in his assigned seat working on his laptop." What exactly requires your assistance? Christopher turned to her, taking in her professional appearance and the legal briefcase she was stowing. Look, in today's climate, you can never be too careful. If someone seems out of place. Out of place based on what criteria? Samantha pressed. His choice of casual attire. Because I don't see you questioning the white gentleman in row 3 who's wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She was referring to David Kim, actually Korean-American, but her point landed. David, a tech entrepreneur who'd made his fortune developing AI-powered security systems, looked up from his phone with interest. He'd been half listening while responding to emails, but now his full attention was on the unfolding drama. That's different, Victoria said, though she couldn't articulate why. It's about behavior, not appearance. What behavior? Harold Johnson asked from row 3 where he and Margaret had taken their seats. I was behind him in line. He stood quietly, presented his boarding pass when asked, and boarded without incident. The only disruptive behavior I've witnessed has been from passengers questioning his right to be here. Maria Santos had heard enough. Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone to take their seats so we can complete boarding. All passengers have been properly verified. If anyone has specific security concerns, I can arrange for you to speak with the captain before departure. Yes, Victoria said immediately. I would like to speak with the captain. Maria's professionalism never cracked, though Darius could see the frustration in the set of her shoulders. I'll inform Captain Williams of your request. As Maria moved toward the cockpit, more passengers filed into first class. Jerome Washington, a young black entrepreneur wearing a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, took the middle seat 2B between Victoria and Darius. He immediately sensed the tension, his eyes meeting Darius's in a moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about shared experiences. Brother, Jerome said quietly to Darius, you good? Darius gave him a slight smile. Perfect. Just another day in paradise. Jerome nodded, understanding, passing between them. He'd paid $8,000 for this ticket, cash he'd earned building a successful logistics company from nothing, and he could already feel Victoria's discomfort radiating from the seat beside him. He pulled out his own phone and began recording, subtle but steady. A junior flight attendant named Kyle approached with the pre-flight drink service. Kyle, 24 and still new enough to be nervous about confrontation, had unfortunately absorbed some of the bias from passengers like Victoria over his short career. He served Victoria first, then Christopher, conspicuously skipping over Darius to serve other passengers before circling back. Sir, Kyle said to Darius, his tone noticeably different from the warmth he'd shown other passengers. I'll need to see your boarding pass. Darius looked up, his expression neutral, but his eyes hard. I've already shown it to the gate agent. Twice, actually, at the request of this passenger. He indicated Victoria. It's just procedure, Kyle said, though they both knew it wasn't. Maria Santos reappeared just in time to witness the exchange. Kyle, she said sharply, what are you doing? I was just... Mr. Mitchell's documentation has been verified. Please continue with the beverage service. Her tone brooked no argument. She turned to Darius. I apologize for that, sir. It won't happen again. I'm sure it won't, Darius replied, though his tone suggested he knew it would happen again and again and again, on flights across the country, in boardrooms, in restaurants, in every space where his presence challenged someone's assumption about who belonged. Victoria wasn't done. She had pulled out her phone and was typing furiously, and Darius could see from the reflection in the window that she was in the Pacific Airways app filing a complaint in real time. The subject line read, Security Concern, Suspicious Passenger in First Class. Captain Robert Williams emerged from the cockpit, having been briefed by Maria about the situation. Robert was a former Air Force pilot with 15 years of commercial aviation experience, the kind of steady presence that could calm any situation. But when his eyes landed on Darius Mitchell, his professional composure cracked. Darius, he said, surprise evident in his voice. Darius Mitchell. Darius looked up, and a genuine smile crossed his face for the first time since boarding. Bobby Williams, I should have known you'd be flying this road. How's Sarah and the kids? Captain Williams moved forward, extending his hand for a firm shake that spoke of years of friendship. They're great, sir. James just got accepted to the Air Force Academy, following the old man's footsteps. The use of sir didn't go unnoticed. Victoria's fingers froze over her phone screen. Christopher shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The entire dynamic of the cabin shifted in that moment, though not everyone understood why. That's wonderful news, Darius said warmly. Tell him I'll put in a good word with General Morrison. We served together in Desert Storm. Captain Williams laughed. You know, he'd appreciate that. But Darius, what are you doing here? I mean, Flying commercial. I thought after the IPO you'd gone full private jet. Darius's smile turned enigmatic. Sometimes you need to see things from ground level, Bobby. Or in this case, from 38,000 feet in coach comfort. Coach comfort, you're in first class. Am I? Darius asked, his tone carrying layers of meaning. Because I've spent the last 20 minutes being told I don't belong here. Captain Williams' expression darkened as he looked around the cabin, taking in Victoria's guilty expression, Christopher's sudden interest in the safety card, and Kyle's obvious discomfort. Maria, the captain, said, his voice carrying command authority. Brief me on what's been happening. Maria stepped forward, her report professional but damning. Passenger in 2C has expressed repeated concerns about Mr. Mitchell's presence in first class despite proper documentation. She requested to speak with you about having him removed or relocated. Captain Williams turned to Victoria, his expression arctic. Ma'am, on what grounds are you requesting another passenger's removal? Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. There were irregularities. The gate agent seemed confused. The gate agent seemed confused because you demanded she scan his boarding pass multiple times. Margaret Johnson interjected from row 3. We were right behind you. We saw everything. I was just being cautious, Victoria protested. In today's climate, Captain Williams interrupted, we have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination. Mr. Mitchell is exactly where he's supposed to be. He paused, looking at Darius, who gave him a subtle nod. The captain straightened, using his announcement voice that carried through the entire first-class cabin and into business class. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? It has come to my attention that one of our passengers has been subjected to harassment and discriminatory treatment. This is not only against Pacific Airways policy, but against everything we stand for as a company. Victoria's face was now cycling through shades of red and white, like a malfunctioning traffic light. Furthermore, Captain Williams continued, his eyes locked on Victoria. I think it's important for everyone here to know exactly who they're sharing this flight with. He paused for dramatic effect. Mr. Darius Mitchell, seated in 2A, is not just a valued passenger. As of last Tuesday, Mr. Mitchell is the majority owner and incoming CEO of Pacific Airways. The silence that followed could have been measured in heartbeats. Victoria's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the tray table. Christopher's mouth fell open, his Princeton education apparently not having prepared him for this moment. Kyle looked like he might faint. Jerome Washington let out a low whistle. Oh, this is beautiful, he said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. This is absolutely beautiful. Samantha Williams, the civil rights attorney, couldn't suppress a smile. She'd seen enough discrimination cases to recognize poetic justice when it unfolded before her eyes, and this was Shakespeare-level dramatic irony. David Kim pulled out both AirPods, his entrepreneurial instincts telling him he was witnessing something that would be studied in business schools for years to come. Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. This can't be. You're lying. This is some kind of trick. Ma'am, Captain Williams said calmly, I've known Mr. Mitchell for 15 years. He mentored me when I was transitioning from military to commercial aviation. I can assure you there's no trick. Darius stood slowly, his full height commanding attention in the confined space. He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each passenger, his voice calm but carrying an authority that had nothing to do with owning the airline and everything to do with owning his truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your morning. This wasn't how I planned to introduce myself to the employees and customers of Pacific Airways. He paused, letting his words sink in. I purchased this airline because my niece, a brilliant young woman with a master's degree from Stanford, was removed from a Pacific Airways flight last month. Her crime making another passenger uncomfortable by sitting in the first-class seat she'd purchased with her own money. He turned to Victoria, who seemed to be shrinking into her seat. Miss Sterling, she whispered. Victoria Sterling. Ms. Sterling, you've provided me with exactly what I needed, confirmation that my investment was necessary. You see, I didn't buy Pacific Airways for profit. I bought it for purpose, to ensure that no one, regardless of their race, religion, or appearance, would ever be made to feel like they don't belong in a seat they've paid for. Christopher tried to salvage something from the situation. Look, Mr. Mitchell, this is all a misunderstanding. Victoria was just concerned about safety. Safety from what? Darius asked, his tone sharpening. What about my presence threatens safety, my hoodie, my laptop? Or is it something else, something you can see but can't say out loud because you know how it would sound? Christopher fell silent, his face flushing red. Maria Santos stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, would you like me to reseat these passengers? Darius considered for a moment. No, Maria, I think Miss Sterling and Mr. Brennan, Christopher supplied weakly. Mr. Brennan should stay exactly where they are. They wanted to document this flight after all. Let's make sure they have the full experience. He pulled out his phone and placed a call the cabin, watching in fascination. Elena, yes, I'm on the flight. Exactly what we discussed. Can you conference in legal and P? Yes, implement immediately. No full transparency. Schedule the press conference for arrival at JFK. Perfect. While Darius handled his call, Victoria turned desperately to Christopher. You saw everything. You can testify that I never mentioned race. This is all being blown out of proportion. Christopher suddenly found the safety card fascinating. I don't want to get involved in any legal issues. Legal issues? Victoria's voice rose. You were supporting me 5 minutes ago. That was before I knew he owned the airline, Christopher muttered. So your principles change based on who has power, Samantha interjected from her seat. How interesting. When you thought he was just a black man in casual clothes, you were ready to have him removed. Now that you know he's the CEO, suddenly you don't want to get involved. It's not like that, Christopher protested weakly. It's exactly like that, Jerome said from seat 2B. Y'all are real tough when you think we're nobody. But the minute you find out we've got power money influence, suddenly you want to act like nothing happened. The plane pushed back from the gate as an uncomfortable silence settled over first class like fog. The usual pre-flight rituals continued around them. Flight attendants demonstrating safety procedures overhead, bins being closed, phones switching to airplane mode. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Every passenger in first class and several who had overheard from business class were acutely aware that they were witnesses to something historic. Victoria Sterling sat rigid in her seat, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. Her phone, now in airplane mode, contained the complaint she'd filed about Darius, a digital record of her discrimination that would undoubtedly become evidence. She thought about her position at Nexus Pharmaceuticals, the carefully cultivated reputation she'd built over 2 decades, the speaking engagements in board positions that might evaporate if this became public. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, could we speak privately? Darius looked up from his laptop where he was reviewing an email from Elena about the press response. We're in a metal tube about to be 38,000 feet in the air, Mrs. Sterling. There's nowhere more private than this and nowhere less private. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of everyone here. They've already witnessed everything else. I want to apologize, Victoria said, the words seeming to physically pain her. I clearly misunderstood the situation. Did you, Darius asked, his tone genuinely curious. What exactly did you misunderstand? You saw a black man in casual clothes in first class and immediately assumed he didn't belong. What's to misunderstand about that? Victoria's face flushed. I was concerned about security. Stop, Darius said firmly. Please stop. You're embarrassing yourself further. Security was never your concern. If it had been, you would have quietly alerted the flight crew and let them handle it. Instead, you made a performance of it, recruited allies, and tried to publicly humiliate someone you perceived as beneath you. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Maria Santos approached with a tablet. Mr. Mitchell, I have the incident report ready for your review. I've documented everything from the moment you boarded. Darius accepted the tablet, scanning through the detailed report. Maria had been thorough. Every comment, every microaggression, every instance of discriminatory behavior was documented with timestamps and witness identification. This is excellent work, Maria, he said. How long have you been with Pacific Airways? 20 years next month, sir. And in those 20 years, how many similar incidents have you witnessed? Maria hesitated, glancing at the other passengers. Would you like my honest answer? Always. Too many to count, sir. We report them, but... She trailed off, professional discretion warring with truthfulness. But nothing happens, Darius finished for her. The reports get filed, maybe someone gets a warning, and the cycle continues. Yes, sir. Darius handed back the tablet. That changes now. Effective immediately, every discrimination complaint will be investigated by an independent panel. Any employee who witnesses discrimination and doesn't report it will face disciplinary action. Any passenger who engages in discriminatory behavior gets one warning, then they're permanently banned from Pacific Airways. Christopher Brennan nearly choked on the water Kyle had just served him. You can't be serious. That's That's corporate suicide. You'll lose half your customer base. Will I? Darius asked. Tell me, Mr. Brennan, what percentage of Pacific Airways revenue comes from minority passengers? Christopher opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know. 38%, Darius supplied, and growing every year. What percentage comes from international travelers who might choose another airline if they heard Pacific Airways tolerates discrimination? Again, Christopher had no answer. 26%, Darius continued. So tell me, should I cater to the shrinking percentage of passengers who think they're entitled to discriminate, or should I serve the growing majority who just want to travel with dignity? David Kim had been furiously typing on his laptop. Mr. Mitchell, he said, I'm David Kim. I run a company called Equity Tech. We develop AI-powered systems to detect and prevent discrimination in real time. If you're serious about systemic change, I'd love to discuss how we could help. Darius smiled slightly. Send your proposal to Elena Rodriguez, my chief of staff. If your technology is as good as you claim, we'll pilot it on select routes within 60 days. The plane lined up on the runway, engines spooling up for takeoff. Captain Williams' voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff. Flight time to New York is approximately 5 hours and 30 minutes. We're expecting some weather over the Rockies, but nothing we can't handle. For those of you in first class, you're part of history today. Not just because of what happened, but because of what's going to happen next. As the plane accelerated down the runway, pressing everyone back into their seats, Victoria's phone began buzzing with texts despite being in airplane mode. She glanced at it and her face went pale. Someone had already posted a video of the boarding incident on social media. The caption read, "Racist woman tries to kick black man off plane. Turns out he owns the airline. #Pacific Justice Darius Mitchell." No, 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 Victoria muttered, watching the view count climb even in the few seconds she looked at it. This can't be happening. It's already happened, Samantha Williams said from her seat. Welcome to the age of accountability, Ms. Sterling. Your actions have consequences now. As the plane lifted off, climbing steeply into the California sky, Jerome Washington turned to Darius. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why didn't you just tell them who you were from the beginning? You could have shut this down immediately. Darius looked out the window at Los Angeles shrinking below them. Because then they would have learned the wrong lesson. They would have learned to be careful around powerful black men, not to treat all black men with respect. Change doesn't come from fear of consequences from those with power. It comes from recognizing the humanity in those without it. The seatbelt sign turned off as they reached cruising altitude. Maria began preparing for the meal service, but the usual first-class atmosphere of quiet productivity had been replaced by something electric, uncertain. Every passenger was hyper-aware of the historic moment they were witnessing. Kyle, the junior flight attendant who had asked to see Darius's boarding pass, approached tentatively. Mr. Mitchell, I need to apologize. My behavior was inexcusable. Darius studied the young man. How long have you been with Pacific Airways, Kyle? 6 months, sir. And in those 6 months, how many times have you asked to see a white passenger's boarding pass after they've already been seated? Kyle's silence was answer enough. You're not fired, Darius said, and Kyle visibly sagged with relief. But you're going to be the first employee to go through our new anti-bias training program. You'll help us develop it, test it, and then you'll help train others. Consider it an opportunity to transform your mistake into something meaningful. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Victoria had been quiet for several minutes, staring at her phone as the video of her confrontation spread across social media. Her carefully curated LinkedIn profile was being flooded with comments. Her company's PR department was calling repeatedly. Her husband had sent 17 text messages, each more panicked than the last. My life is over, she said quietly to no one in particular. No, Darius said, overhearing her. Your life as you knew it is over. What comes next is up to you. You can either be the woman who got caught being racist on a plane, or you can be the woman who got caught, acknowledge her bias, and work to change. The choice is yours. How? Victoria asked, with tears starting to form in her eyes. How do I come back from this? By doing the work, Margaret Johnson said from row 3. She had been quiet since boarding, but now her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had lived through the civil rights movement. Real change, not performative nonsense. Not a few diversity workshops and a donation to the NAACP. Real hard, uncomfortable work. What kind of work? Victoria asked. Start by examining why you immediately assumed Darius didn't belong here, Margaret continued. Not the surface excuse about security, but the real reason. The programming you've received since childhood. The messages you've absorbed from media, from family, from society. Confront the ugly truth about yourself. Christopher had been listening to this exchange with increasing discomfort. Look, I get that what happened was wrong, but aren't we taking this a bit far? I mean, she didn't use any slurs. She didn't physically assault anyone. Mr. Brennan, Samantha interrupted, are you familiar with the concept of death by 1,000 cuts? I've heard the phrase. Every time someone like Ms. Sterling questions whether a black person belongs in a space that's a cut, every time someone like you backs them up without question, that's a cut. Every suspicious look, every extra verification, every random security check, they're all cuts. And they add up. They wear people down. They make brilliant, accomplished people question whether they should even try to occupy certain spaces. She pulled out her phone and showed him something. This is my 13-year-old nephew, straight-A student chess champion, volunteers at a homeless shelter every weekend. Last month, he was removed from a first-class seat on another airline because a passenger complained he was probably in the wrong seat. He had saved for 6 months to buy that ticket to visit his grandmother. He hasn't smiled the same since. The cabin fell silent again. The weight of Samantha's words, the pain in them, was palpable. Darius stood up and moved to the galley where Maria was preparing the meal service. Maria, I want to address the crew. Can you gather everyone who's not actively serving passengers? Within minutes, the available flight attendants had gathered. Darius looked at each of them, Maria, Kyle, and 2 others he hadn't met yet. I know this has been an unusual flight already, he began. And I know you're probably wondering what this means for you, for your jobs, for the company. Let me be clear. I didn't buy Pacific Airways to fire people or cut costs. I bought it to make it the airline that every employee is proud to work for and every passenger feels welcome to fly. One of the flight attendants, an older woman named Patricia, raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Mitchell, can I share something? Please do. I've been flying for 30 years. Started with Pan Am, moved through 3 mergers. In all that time, I've watched passengers treat my colleagues of color differently. The extra scrutiny, the assumptions, the complaints. I've filed dozens of reports. Nothing ever changed. Today is the first time I've seen someone in power actually experience it and do something about it. That's why I needed to experience it myself, Darius said. Reports and statistics are just numbers. Living it, feeling it. That's what drives real change. Back in the cabin, the breakfast service had begun. The usual first-class meal. Eggs, Benedict fresh fruit, artisanal pastries. Seemed surreal given the circumstances. Victoria picked at her food, unable to eat. Christopher focused intently on cutting his Canadian bacon into perfectly equal pieces. Jerome and David had struck up a conversation about technology and social justice. Harold Johnson stood up and moved to where Darius had returned to his seat. Mr. Mitchell, I should introduce myself properly. Harold Johnson, retired federal judge for the Ninth Circuit. Darius's eyes widened slightly. Judge Johnson, you wrote the opinion in Crawford v. United Airlines. That case set precedent for discrimination claims in aviation. Harold smiled. You've done your homework. Yes, that was me. And I have to say what you're doing here, using your position to create systemic change, it's exactly what we need. The law can only do so much. Real change comes from within institutions. Would you be interested in serving on Pacific Airways' new Diversity and Inclusion Board? Darius asked. We need people with your experience and perspective. I'm retired, Mr. Mitchell. From the bench, yes, but not from justice. Harold chuckled. You make a compelling argument. I'll consider it. As Harold returned to his seat, the plane encountered turbulence. The seatbelt sign came on and Captain Williams' voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some rough air over the Rockies. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The turbulence was moderate but persistent, the plane bouncing and dropping in the unstable air. Victoria gripped her armrest, her knuckles white. Despite everything that had happened, Darius noticed her distress. First turbulence, he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. It feels worse than it is, he said calmly. Captain Williams is one of the best pilots I know. Former fighter pilot used to fly F-16s through actual hostile fire. A little rough air is nothing to him. Victoria looked at him, confusion evident in her eyes. Why are you being kind to me after everything I did? Because Darius said hatred breeds hatred. Someone has to break the cycle. Besides, I've learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's transforming them into allies. The turbulence continued for another 10 minutes before smoothing out. As it did, Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call on Wi-Fi. She looked at the screen. It was Richard Thornton, CEO of Nexus Pharmaceuticals. "I have to take this," she said, standing up. "By all means," Darius replied. Victoria moved to this galley area, trying to find some privacy. Her voice carried despite her efforts to keep it down. "Richard, I can explain." "No, it's not what it looks like. Yes, I've seen the video. I understand the position this puts the company in tomorrow, but I'm not back until tonight." "Yes, sir. I understand." She returned to her seat, face ashen. "That was my CEO. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss my future with the company. The video has been picked up by major news outlets. They're calling it a PR nightmare." "It is," Darius agreed, "but nightmares can become wake-up calls if you let them." Christopher's phone was also buzzing incessantly. He glanced at it and groaned. "My firm is asking for a statement. Someone recognized me in the video. They want to know if my views represent the company's position." "Do they?" Samantha asked pointedly. I need to think about what I'm going to say." "Here's a thought," Jerome offered. "Try the truth. Say you got caught up in someone else's prejudice, that you made assumptions without evidence, and that you're committed to doing better. People respect honesty even when it's admitting you were wrong." Meanwhile, the video had gone viral enough to reach traditional media. Elena Rodriguez boarded the plane's Wi-Fi to brief Darius via secure message. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have all picked up the story. The hashtag Pacific Justice is trending #1 nationally. We have interview requests from 67 outlets. The White House press secretary was asked about it during the morning briefing. "Your acquisition of Pacific Airways is now public knowledge." Stock market response has been mixed, but leaning positive. Social media sentiment is 73% supportive. Victoria Sterling has been identified. Her company's stock dropped 3% in the last hour. Darius read the message and sighed. He had wanted a quiet acquisition time to implement changes gradually. But perhaps this was better. A flashpoint that demanded immediate action rather than slow institutional change that could be resisted and diluted. He stood up and moved to the center of the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention. What happened this morning is already public. The video has gone viral, the media is covering it, and Pacific Airways is now at the center of a national conversation about discrimination in air travel." He paused, looking at each passenger. "Each of you is going to be asked about what you witnessed. You'll have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. But let me share something my mother taught me. In the end, we regret the chances we didn't take to stand up for what's right, far more than any consequences we face for speaking truth." David Kim raised his hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been drafting a statement about what I witnessed. Would you like to review it?" "That's your statement, Mr. Kim? Speak your truth." Margaret Johnson stood up, her aged hands gripping the seatback for support. "Mr. Mitchell, my husband and I would like to volunteer for your diversity board. We've been fighting this fight for 60 years. We'd like to see it through. I would be honored to have you both." The plane was now over Nevada, the desert sprawling endlessly below. Captain Williams made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to add something personal. I've known Darius Mitchell for 15 years. He's the reason I have this job. He recommended me to Pacific Airways when I was struggling to transition from military to civilian aviation. He's also the reason my son has a full scholarship to college. The man doesn't publicize his good deeds, but I've watched him change lives quietly for years. Today you're seeing him do it publicly, and it's about damn time." The announcement was unusual. Captains rarely made personal statements like that. But nothing about this flight was usual anymore. Kyle approached Victoria with a fresh cup of coffee. "Ma'am, can I offer you something? You look like you could use it." Victoria looked up at him, surprised by the kindness. "Why are you being nice to me?" "Because," Kyle said, "Mr. Mitchell is right. Someone has to break the cycle. Plus, I was part of the problem earlier. The least I can do is be part of the solution now." As Victoria accepted the coffee, her phone rang again. This time it was her daughter Emma calling from her dorm room at Berkeley. "Mom, I saw the video. We need to talk." Victoria stepped away, again her voice breaking as she spoke. "Emma, honey, I can explain. Mom, I'm dating someone. His name is Marcus. He's black. We've been together for 6 months and I didn't tell you because I knew how you'd react. Because I've heard how you talk about black people when you think no one's listening. Victoria's legs nearly gave out. She slumped against the galley wall. Mom, I love you, but I'm ashamed of you right now. Marcus saw the video. His whole family did. How am I supposed to face them? How am I supposed to explain that my mother is the woman trying to kick a black man off a plane? I'm flying home tomorrow. We're going to have a long conversation about this. And Mom, you're going to meet Marcus and his family. And you're going to apologize to them for every racist thing you've ever said or thought. Or you're going to lose your daughter. The call ended. Victoria stood in the galley, tears streaming down her face. Maria found her there a moment later. Miss Sterling, are you all right? No, Victoria said honestly. No, I'm not. But maybe that's the point. Maybe I needed to not be all right to finally see what I've been doing wrong. Maria handed her a tissue. The first step to changing is recognizing you need to change. The second step is actually doing it. How, Victoria asked. How do I undo 48 years of prejudice? One day at a time, Maria said. One interaction at a time, one person at a time. Back in the cabin, Darius was on a conference call with his board of directors. He had it on speaker, not caring who heard. Darius, the publicity is out of control, one board member said. We need damage control. No, Darius replied firmly. We need to lean into this. Schedule a press conference for when we land. Full transparency. We're going to announce our new policies publicly. The shareholders will adapt or they can sell. I have enough capital to buy them out if necessary. Another board member spoke up. Darius, you're talking about revolutionizing the entire airline industry. The pushback will be enormous. Good, Darius said. Revolution doesn't happen without resistance. But I'd rather fail trying to do right than succeed maintaining wrong. The call ended with grudging agreement from the board. They knew Darius had the votes and the capital to do whatever he wanted. Samantha Williams had been documenting everything on her laptop. Mr. Mitchell, I'm writing a legal analysis of what happened here. With your permission, I'd like to publish it in the Harvard Law Review. This could set precedent for how companies handle discrimination. Write your article, Ms. Williams. But more importantly, would you consider being our chief diversity officer? We need someone who understands both the law and the lived experience. Samantha's eyes widened. That's a big career change. It's a chance to make real change instead of just writing about it. I'll think about it. The plane was now over Colorado, and Captain Williams announced they were beginning their initial descent into the New York area. The flight that had started with discrimination was ending with transformation. Christopher Brennan had been quiet for the last hour, staring out the window. Finally, he turned to Darius. Mr. Mitchell, I need to say something. Go ahead. I've been thinking about what I did, why I automatically sided with Victoria without question. And I realized something. I've been doing this my whole life. Seeing a situation, making assumptions based on appearance, choosing the side that looks like me. I never thought I was racist because I never used slurs, never explicitly said anything racist. But that's just semantics, isn't it? It's a start, Mr. Brennan. Recognizing implicit bias is the first step to addressing it. I want to do more than recognize it. I want to fix it. I work at a venture capital firm. We've funded hundreds of startups, and I just realized I can count on one hand how many were led by people of color. That's not a coincidence, is it? What do you think? I think I've been part of a system that perpetuates inequality while telling myself I'm colorblind. That ends today. Jerome, who had been listening, spoke up. You know, I pitched to your firm last year, Brennan Capital, right? I was told my logistics platform was too niche for your portfolio. Christopher's face flushed. What was your company? Washington Logistics. We're doing $50 million in revenue now. We turned down a $50 million company. You turned down a black founder. The company was always going to succeed. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Christopher pulled out his phone and started typing. I'm sending an email to my partners. We're going to review every rejection from the last 5 years, look at the demographics, and see what patterns emerge. And Mr. Washington, if you're ever looking for Series B funding, please call me. Jerome smiled slightly. I'll think about it. As Pacific Airways Flight 892 began its descent into the New York metropolitan area, the transformation that had begun at 38,000 feet was becoming something larger. Elena Rodriguez had boarded the plane's Wi-Fi to coordinate with the ground team, and her updates to Darius painted a picture of a story that had captured the nation's attention. Darius, she said through the secure connection, this is bigger than we anticipated. There are news trucks at JFK. The mayor's office called. They want to be part of the press conference. 3 senators have issued statements. The Congressional Black Caucus wants to honor you next week. And, she paused. Former President Obama's office reached out. He wants to discuss making Pacific Airways a case study for his foundation's work on systemic change. Darius absorbed this information while looking out at the Manhattan skyline becoming visible in the distance. What had started as a personal, fact-finding mission had become a national moment of reckoning. Victoria Sterling had returned to her seat, her face puffy from crying, but somehow more human than it had been all morning. She turned to Darius. "My daughter is flying home from Berkeley tomorrow. She wants me to meet her boyfriend and his family. They're Black. She's been hiding the relationship from me because she knew how I'd react." "And how would you have reacted?" Darius asked gently. "Badly," Victoria admitted. "I would have said all the things concerned parents say when they're really just being racist. I would have worried about what my friends would think, what the neighbors would say. I would have made it about me instead of about her happiness. And now I'm worried about whether they'll ever be able to look at me without seeing that video. Whether I've poisoned my daughter's relationship before it even had a chance." Children have an amazing capacity to forgive parents who genuinely change. Margaret Johnson offered from her seat. "My son married a white woman in '95. Her parents didn't come to the wedding. Today, 28 years later, they're the best grandparents my grandchildren could ask for. But it took work, years of work." "I don't know if I have years," Victoria said. "The way news cycles work now, I'll be forever frozen in this moment." "Then make this moment the beginning of something better," Darius suggested. "Own your mistake publicly. Don't minimize it, don't excuse it. Own it fully and commit to change publicly." Victoria pulled out her phone and began typing. She showed the screen to Darius. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I am the woman in the video trying to have a Black man removed from first class. There are no excuses for my behavior. I was racist. I made assumptions based on skin color and tried to use my privilege to harm someone I perceived as not belonging. Mr. Darius Mitchell showed me grace I didn't deserve. I'm committed to earning that grace through action, not words. I will be documenting my journey to confront my racism publicly, not for forgiveness, but for accountability. To my daughter Emma, who I know will see this, I'm ready to meet Marcus and his family, and I'm ready to become the mother you deserve." "Post it," Darius said. Victoria hit send, her hands shaking slightly. Within seconds, responses began flooding in, some supportive, many angry, all watching to see if her actions would match her words. Captain Williams' voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about 15 minutes from landing at JFK. The weather is clear, but I should warn you, there's significant media presence at our gate. For those of you who wish to avoid the cameras, our crew will escort you through an alternate exit. For those willing to speak to what you witnessed today, thank you for your courage." Christopher Brennan was on a call with his business partners, his voice firm. "I don't care about the optics, Brad. We're implementing blind resume reviews immediately. All identifying information removed before we evaluate any pitch or proposal. Yes, it will slow things down. No, I don't care. Because we just found out we passed on a $50 million company because of bias. I'll explain everything when I'm back in the office." Samantha Williams had finished her initial legal brief and was reading it to Darius. "The incident on Pacific Airways Flight 892 represents a watershed moment in corporate accountability for discrimination. When CEO Darius Mitchell chose to experience his airline service incognito, he exposed not just individual prejudice, but systemic failures in how the aviation industry handles discrimination. His real-time implementation of zero-tolerance policies, while still airborne, demonstrates that institutional change doesn't require committees, studies, or gradual implementation. It requires willpower and the courage to act decisively. Send it to the Harvard Law Review," Darius said, "but also send it to every major news outlet. Let's make this conversation unavoidable." Kyle, the junior flight attendant, approached nervously. "Mr. Mitchell, the crew wanted me to tell you something. We took a vote, all of us, pilots, flight attendants, even the ground crew listening in. We're behind you 100%. We've been waiting for someone to stand up to this behavior. To have it be our own CEO, it means everything." Maria Santos added, "We've started a petition among the crew, over 500 signatures already asking to be part of the new training program. We want to be the example for the industry." The plane banked over Long Island, lining up for final approach. Below, the sprawl of New York City stretched to the horizon, 8 million people going about their lives, most unaware of the drama playing out above them. Jerome Washington pulled out a business card and handed it to Darius. Mr. Mitchell, my company specializes in logistics and supply chain management. If Pacific Airways ever needs consultation on operational efficiency while implementing these new policies, I'd be honored to help. We'll need all the help we can get, Darius replied. Change is expensive and complicated, but so is discrimination. We've just been hiding those costs for too long. David Kim had been running projections on his laptop. Mr. Mitchell, I've been analyzing the potential impact. If you lose the customers who oppose these policies, but gain those who support them, you could see a 15 to 20% increase in revenue within 18 months. The millennial and Gen Z markets alone could double your market share. It's not about the money, Darius said, then smiled slightly. But it's nice to know doing right can also be profitable. As the plane descended through 10,000 feet, phones began reconnecting to cellular networks. The cabin filled with the sound of notifications, texts, emails, social media alerts, the outside world flooding back in. Victoria's phone showed 847 notifications. Her LinkedIn post had been shared thousands of times. Her company's PR department had called 18 times. Her husband had sent a simple message, "I'm proud of you for owning it. We'll get through this together." But it was a text from her daughter Emma that made her cry again. "Mom, I saw your post. Marcus saw it too. He says anyone brave enough to admit they're wrong publicly deserves a chance to make it right. We'll see you tomorrow. I love you." Harold Johnson stood up as the plane continued its descent. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been thinking about your diversity board. You'll need more than good intentions. You'll need legal framework, implementation strategies, accountability measures. My wife and I would like to volunteer not just as board members, but as active participants in developing the training program." "Judge Johnson, that would be invaluable. When can you start?" "How about right now I can have a preliminary framework drafted by the time we land?" His wife Margaret smiled. "Harold's been waiting 60 years for a chance like this. He's not going to waste a minute." The plane's wheels touched down at JFK at exactly 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time. As they taxied to the gate, everyone could see the media presence. News vans, cameras, reporters ready with microphones. But there was also something else: Pacific Airways employees, hundreds of them, standing in solidarity, many holding signs that read, "We stand with change," and "Dignity for all passengers." Captain Williams made his final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. For those of you on Flight 892, you've been part of history. Not because of what went wrong, but because of how it's being made right. Mr. Mitchell, the entire crew would like to thank you for your courage and leadership. And Miss Sterling, we appreciate your willingness to confront your mistakes publicly. That takes courage too." As the plane pulled into the gate, Elena Rodriguez boarded via the jet bridge, carrying a tablet and looking every bit the crisis manager she was. "Darius, we have 37 interview requests. The press conference is set up in Terminal 4. The board is fully behind you. Surprisingly, the stock is up 2%. Apparently, investors believe in ethical leadership." "Of course they do," Darius said. "They just needed someone to show them it was possible." As passengers began to deplane, each seemed to pause at Darius's seat. The Johnson shook his hand. David Kim confirmed a follow-up meeting. Samantha Williams accepted the position of Chief Diversity Officer on the spot. Jerome Washington simply nodded with respect. Christopher Brennan stopped and said, "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to make this right, not just today, but every day going forward." "That's all any of us can do, Ms. Brennan." Finally, Victoria Sterling stood to leave. She looked at Darius, searching for words. "I don't know how to thank you for not destroying me when you had every right to." "Miss Sterling, destroying you would have been easy and satisfying for about 5 minutes. Transforming you might change the world. Your daughter is watching. Your company is watching. Hundreds of thousands of people are watching. What you do next matters more than what you did this morning." Victoria nodded, straightened her shoulders, and walked off the plane to face the cameras, the questions, and the consequences of her actions. Darius was the last to leave, walking slowly through the first-class cabin that had become a classroom, a courtroom, and ultimately a catalyst for change. Maria Santos and her crew lined up to shake his hand as he passed. "This is just the beginning," he told them. "We have a lot of work ahead." "We're ready, sir," Maria replied for all of them. As Darius emerged into the jet bridge, he could hear the reporters shouting questions. He paused, taking a deep breath. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter Zara. "Dad, I saw everything. Mom would be so proud. You didn't just buy an airline. You bought a chance to change the world. Go get 'em." He smiled, thinking of his late wife, Michelle, who had always pushed him to use his success for something bigger than himself. This was for her, for Zara, for his niece, who'd been humiliated on a plane, for every person who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a space they'd rightfully earned. The press conference was held in a large conference room overlooking the tarmac. Darius stood at a podium bearing the Pacific Airways logo, flanked by Captain Williams, Maria Santos, and Elena Rodriguez. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and Pacific Airways employees who had come to witness this moment. "Good afternoon," Darius began, his voice strong and clear. "My name is Darius Mitchell, and as of last week, I am the majority owner and CEO of Pacific Airways. This morning's incident on Flight 892 from Los Angeles has already been widely reported, so let me address what happens next." He paused, looking directly into the main camera. "Effective immediately, Pacific Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Any employee who witnesses and doesn't report discrimination will face termination. Any passenger who engages in discriminatory behavior will receive one warning documented in our system. A second incident results in a lifetime ban from our airline." A reporter shouted, "Isn't that extreme? Is it extreme to expect people to treat each other with basic human dignity?" Darius responded, "If that's extreme, then we've accepted discrimination as normal for far too long." Another reporter, "What about Victoria Sterling? Will she be banned?" "Ms. Sterling has publicly acknowledged her behavior and committed to change. She'll be participating in our new passenger accountability program. If she completes it successfully, she'll be welcomed as a passenger. If not, she'll face the same consequences as anyone else." "What about the financial impact?" Elena stepped to the microphone. "We project an initial 5–10% loss in customers who refuse to comply with anti-discrimination policies. However, market research shows a potential 20–30% gain from customers who have been waiting for an airline that prioritizes dignity and respect. We're not losing money. We're exchanging customers who discriminate for customers who don't." The questions continued for an hour. Through it all, Darius remained calm, factual, and unwavering in his commitment to change. When asked about his personal experience, he shared the story of his niece, his voice breaking slightly as he described her humiliation. "No one should have to buy an airline to be treated with respect," he said. "But since I could, I did. And now we're going to make sure no one on Pacific Airways ever feels that way again." As the press conference concluded, Darius noticed Victoria Sterling standing in the back of the room. She had stayed for the entire event, facing the cameras and the judgment. When reporters approached her, she didn't run. She answered their questions honestly, acknowledging her racism and committing to public accountability. Later, as Darius was leaving the airport, his phone rang. It was his board chairman, William Crawford, an old-money billionaire who had initially opposed the acquisition. "Darius, I owe you an apology. I thought this was just another vanity purchase, a rich man buying a toy. But what you did today, my granddaughter called me crying. She's biracial, and she's been hiding it at her prep school because she's afraid of how people will react. She saw your press conference and said if you can change an airline, she can change her school. You didn't just transform Pacific Airways today. You gave courage to millions of people." 6 months later, Pacific Airways published its first diversity report. The results exceeded all projections. Discrimination complaints down 73%, employee satisfaction up 67%, customer satisfaction among minority passengers up 89%, overall revenue up 18%, stock price up 34%. Victoria Sterling completed the Passenger Accountability Program and became an unlikely advocate for anti-racism education in corporate America. Her daughter Emma and her boyfriend Marcus became engaged with Victoria, giving a toast at their engagement party about the power of confronting one's own prejudices. Christopher Brennan's venture capital firm implemented blind review processes and increased funding to minority-led startups by 400%. He hired Jerome Washington as a senior advisor. Kyle, the flight attendant, became Pacific Airways' lead trainer for anti-bias education. His own journey from unconscious bias to awareness, making him uniquely effective. Samantha Williams, as Chief Diversity Officer, helped draft legislation that was adopted by 12 states requiring airlines to report discrimination incidents publicly. The Johnsons established the Johnson Foundation for Equity in Travel, funded in part by Darius, which provided legal support to victims of travel discrimination. But perhaps the most meaningful change came in a letter Darius received a year after the incident. Dear Mr. Mitchell, my name is Keisha Brown. I'm 16 years old. Last month, I flew first class for the first time using money I saved from my part-time job. I was traveling to visit colleges hoping to be the first in my family to attend university. When I boarded, no one questioned whether I belonged there. No one asked to see my boarding pass twice. No one made me feel like I was in the wrong place. The flight attendant smiled and called me Ms. Brown and asked if I needed anything. I cried in my seat, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my life, I was in a space that some would say I don't belong in, and I was treated like I belonged. I got accepted to Yale last week. When they asked in my interview about a moment that changed my life, I told them about that flight, about how being treated with dignity in first class made me believe I could belong anywhere. Thank you for making that possible. Thank you for buying an airline just to make sure kids like me can dream bigger. With gratitude, Keisha Brown, future Yale class of 2028. Darius framed that letter and hung it in his office at Pacific Airways headquarters next to a photo from Flight 892. In the image taken by a passenger and shared millions of times, he stood in the first-class cabin surrounded by the diverse group of passengers who had witnessed history being made. The photo became iconic, used in business schools and civil rights museums, as an example of how one person with power and conviction could transform not just a company, but an entire industry's culture. But for Darius, it was simply a reminder of why he'd bought the airline in the first place, to ensure that no one would ever again be made to feel like they didn't belong in a seat they'd paid for, in a space they had every right to occupy in a country that promised equality, but so often failed to deliver it. Pacific Airways' new slogan, unveiled at the annual shareholders meeting, captured the transformation perfectly, where everyone flies first class. And for the first time in commercial aviation history, it wasn't just marketing. It was a promise enforced by policy, protected by principle, and proven every day at 38,000 feet. The ripple effects of Flight 892 continued long after that day. Other airlines facing public pressure and seeing Pacific Airways' success began implementing similar policies. Within 2 years, the aviation industry had transformed from one of the most complained about sectors for discrimination to a model for corporate accountability. Victoria Sterling wrote a book about her journey from unconscious bias to active anti-racism. All proceeds went to organizations fighting discrimination. She became a sought-after speaker, not as an expert, but as a cautionary tale willing to bare her soul for the education of others. Christopher Brennan's firm became the leading investor in minority-owned businesses, generating returns that proved diversity wasn't just morally right, but financially smart. Darius Mitchell was invited to address Congress about corporate responsibility and systemic change. His testimony, which began with the simple phrase, I bought an airline because my niece was humiliated on a flight, led to the passage of the Airline Passenger Dignity Act. But in the end, the true measure of success wasn't in laws passed or profits earned. It was in the thousands of passengers who boarded Pacific Airways flights every day, regardless of their race, religion, or appearance, and felt something that should have always been guaranteed, but rarely was welcome. The transformation that began with one man in a UCLA hoodie being questioned in the priority boarding line had become something larger than anyone could have imagined. It proved that change was possible, that systems could be reformed, that courage could be contagious, and that sometimes the best way to fight discrimination wasn't just to protest it, but to buy the whole damn plane and change the rules of flying. As Darius often said in interviews afterward, I didn't want to own an airline, I wanted to own change. The airline was just the vehicle. And what a vehicle it turned out to be. 5 years later, at Zara Mitchell's wedding, Darius gave a toast that brought the room to tears. My daughter asked me to tell the story of Flight 892 tonight because she says it's the moment I became not just her father, but her hero. But the truth is, I was just a man who got tired of seeing people who look like us treated as less than. I was tired of writing checks to fight discrimination while discrimination kept winning. So I decided to buy the game and change the rules. To Victoria Sterling, who's here tonight with her daughter Emma and son-in-law Marcus, thank you for having the courage to change publicly. Your transformation gave others permission to examine their own biases. To all the employees of Pacific Airways who stood with us, you proved that institutions are only as good as the people within them who demand better. And to my late wife Michelle, who I know is watching, this was always your dream, sweetheart. You always said, don't just open doors, baby. Buy the whole building and take the doors off the hinges. Well, I bought the airline and we took off more than doors. We took off the masks that let discrimination hide in polite society. But most importantly to every young person here tonight, remember this. You don't have to accept the world as it is. If you have the power to change it, you have the responsibility to change it. And if you don't have the power yet, work until you do. Because somewhere out there is a 16-year-old Keisha Brown who needs to know she belongs in first class in the boardroom in the Oval Office wherever her dreams take her. That's the real legacy of Flight 892. Not that one man bought an airline, but that millions of people decided they wouldn't accept discrimination as the price of flying anymore. We changed an industry by changing expectations. And if we can do it at 38,000 feet, we can do it at ground level too. The room erupted in applause, but Darius noticed something more important. His daughter's eyes shining with pride, looking at him the way she used to look at her mother, like someone who didn't just talk about change but made it happen. Later that night as the wedding wound down, Darius stood on the terrace of the venue looking up at the planes passing overhead. Each one carrying hundreds of people to hundreds of destinations, and on Pacific Airways flights, at least every single one of them treated with the dignity they deserved. Victoria Sterling joined him on the terrace, now 5 years removed from that morning at LAX, but forever changed by it. "Do you ever regret how it happened?" she asked. "The public nature of it all." Darius considered the question. "Do you?" "Every day," Victoria admitted, "but I'm also grateful every day. If it had happened privately, I might have apologized and moved on, learned nothing. The public shame forced me to really confront who I was. My daughter Emma tells me I'm a different person now. Better, more aware, more human." "We all are," Darius replied. "That's the thing about public reckonings. They force private transformations." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had started as adversaries and become unlikely allies in the fight for dignity and respect. "My granddaughter is due next month," Victoria said. "Emma and Marcus are naming her Michelle after your late wife. They said without her influence on you, none of this would have happened." Darius felt tears prick his eyes. Michelle would have loved that. She always believed in redemption and second chances and the power of people to become better than they were. "She raised a good man," Victoria said, "and that man changed the world." "No," Darius corrected gently. "We changed the world. All of us on that flight, everyone who chose transformation over comfort. Everyone who decided dignity mattered more than profit. Change doesn't come from one person, it comes from communities choosing to be better." As they headed back inside, Darius's phone buzzed with a message from Captain Williams, who was flying the late-night Pacific Airways flight from Los Angeles to New York. "Just wanted you to know, full flight tonight, completely peaceful. A young black woman in first class, probably 18 or 19, wearing a UCLA hoodie just like you did. No one questioned her. No one stared. The flight attendant asked if she was comfortable and needed anything. She said everything was perfect. Thought you should know. The dream is real now. Safe travels, Captain Williams." Darius smiled, showing the message to Victoria. "That's the world we're leaving them," she said, gesturing toward the young people dancing at the wedding. "A world where wearing a hoodie while black in first class isn't suspicious." "It's a start," Darius agreed. "Just a start, but every flight, every passenger treated with dignity, every employee who stands up to discrimination, they all add up." As the wedding ended and guests began to leave, many stopped to shake Darius's hand to share their own stories of discrimination faced or witnessed, of changes made in their own companies and communities inspired by Flight 892. The last to leave were Harold and Margaret Johnson, now in their late 70s, but still serving on Pacific Airways Diversity Board with unflagging energy. "You know," Harold said, "in 1961, when Margaret was riding those freedom buses getting beaten for sitting in the wrong section, if someone had told her that 60 years later a black man would buy an entire airline to ensure dignity for all passengers, she would have thought they were dreaming." Margaret smiled. "But that's what the civil rights movement was. A dream that became reality through courage and action. Flight 892 was just the next chapter in a very long book. And it's still being written," Darius added. "Every day, every flight, every person who chooses respect over prejudice adds a page." As everyone left, Darius remained behind for a moment, looking at the photo from Flight 892 that Zara had displayed at the wedding. All those faces: Victoria, Christopher, the Johnsons, Jerome, Samantha, David, Maria, Kyle, Captain Williams, frozen in a moment that changed everything. He thought about his mother, who had cleaned airplane cabins for 30 years, never allowed to sit in the seats she vacuumed. He thought about his father, who had been removed from a flight in 1974 for disturbing white passengers with his presence. He thought about Michelle, who had always believed money without purpose was meaningless. And he thought about Keisha Brown, probably at Yale now, studying hard, dreaming, big, knowing she belonged wherever her ambition took her. "This is for all of you," he whispered to the photo, to the memory of Michelle, to every person who had ever been made to feel small in spaces they had every right to occupy. Then he turned and walked back into the celebration where Zara was dancing with her new husband, where Victoria was laughing with Emma and Marcus, where Harold and Margaret were teaching the young people the dance moves from their youth, where the world looked a little more like it should have always looked, diverse, dignified, and full of joy. The revolution that began at 38,000 feet had landed safely, but its journey was far from over. Every day, on every flight, in every interaction, the promise of Flight 892 was being kept. Everyone flies first class when dignity is the destination. And somewhere in the sky above them, Pacific Airways Flight 892 was making its regular run from Los Angeles to New York, carrying passengers of every color, creed, and background, all of them seated exactly where they belonged, wherever they had chosen to sit. The flight attendant on that route tonight, it was Cal, now senior crew chief, who began each flight with the same announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Pacific Airways, where everyone flies first class. We measure that not by your seat assignment, but by how we treat you. Every passenger on this aircraft has the right to dignity, respect, and safety. Any behavior that violates those rights will not be tolerated. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. We're honored to have you with us." It had become known among frequent flyers as the Flight 892 speech, and passengers often applauded when they heard it. Some even chose Pacific Airways specifically to hear it, to be part of an airline that had chosen principle over profit and proved you could have both. As Kyle finished his announcement on tonight's flight, he noticed a familiar face in 2A, the same seat Darius Mitchell had occupied 5 years ago. It was Keisha Brown, the girl whose letter had moved Darius to tears, now a Yale graduate heading to Harvard Law School. She was wearing a UCLA hoodie, and nobody questioned whether she belonged there. Because on Pacific Airways, everyone belonged everywhere. That was the promise. That was the revolution. That was the legacy of a flight that took off in discrimination and landed in transformation. And it was just the beginning.